On today's episode of Cornell Keynotes, communication expert Maria Wolfe reminds us that effective communication remains, still as much as ever, anchored in timeless principles. And while we have countless digital tools available to us, such as generative AI, Maria emphasizes that real connection, developing an authentic voice, and emotional intelligence continue to be the foundation of communication. Professor Wolfe provides pointers on how to communicate in professional settings, stressing the importance of knowing your audience and developing an authentic style that is in your true voice. You'll learn how to deal with public speaking anxiety, how to drive audience engagement, and how to communicate across virtual, written, or in-person platforms. You'll get practical advice and hear about real-world examples that demonstrate how to maintain consistency and, critically, how to be adaptable in any communication scenario. So be sure to check out the episode notes for more information on eCornell's Business Communication Certificate Program, which is authored by our guest, Maria Wolfe, and brought to you in partnership with the Johnson School at Cornell. And now, here's my discussion with Maria Wolfe. So what we're talking about today is leveling up your communication chops. And this is whether it's a small group Zoom meeting or presenting for a large audience. How do you teach at Cornell? Tell us about your whole approach, who you teach, what the desired outcomes for your courses are. What do you want people to do?
Well, I teach at multiple levels, multiple courses. So I, of course, teach our undergraduate students. I teach two core courses, business writing and persuasive communication. And I also have an elective course on unscripted communication, impactful unscripted communication. And that one also is offered at the graduate level. So I teach at our executive MMH program, and students there take this course as well. And of course, I have opportunities to work more with our executive education programs with practitioners all over the world, people who work in hospitality.
Perfect. Good. One through line or one theme that always emerges in your courses, in person or otherwise, is knowing your audience, identifying with them, making communications, and most critically, maybe like understanding their motivations. Why are they there? What are you trying to communicate? What do you want them to do? Give us some advice on how to best know our audience, or at least get us thinking about what we need to learn about.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think that probably goes back to your earlier question, Chris, about what I teach through all of my courses.
Yeah.
And you just nailed it, because understanding your audience is probably one of the most important skill sets that I bring up and I train my students and practitioners in all of those courses and all these opportunities. The most important thing in learning about your audience is, of course, your willingness to do the homework and to think about who is your listener, who is your reader, what they want, what they don't want, what their values are, what their desires are, what could be their, I would call them hot buttons, right? Some triggers. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. And thinking about how you can adjust your communication accordingly. So at the end of the day, the bottom line is, if you want to be a successful communicator, tell them what they want to hear. Give the audience what they want. And it's sometimes not exactly what you want to share. So the emotional intelligence concept is the one that helps us make those decisions and adjust accordingly.
Sometimes we can't always know our audience, right? We're having a meeting with people we don't know. We're presenting to a crowd
Yep.
elsewhere that we don't know a lot about. But through some of your teaching, you talk about having a system or a process for knowing your audience. What's that about? How do you do that?
Well, one important thing, especially when you don't know your audience, well, of course, you make your best guess. You sometimes go online, research the company, who works there, what common traits that you may have there. But another important skill set is to be very present when you're communicating with those people, to read the room, to pay attention and see the audience reaction. And of course, adjust as you go, because sometimes whatever plan that you had that you came in is not working. And you need to think on your feet and change that game plan. I would say one of the important things to keep in mind is, remember that, as I said, you want to give them what they want. And sometimes, honestly, just ask them. Ask them and pay attention and be willing to listen. Don't just assume that you know everything, because that's, of course, not possible. People often don't even think about asking the audience, asking their feedback, asking them questions as they communicate. But I think that's one of the most useful approaches. It's just don't treat them as some passive crowd that just sits there and passively listens to what you're saying. Have a conversation with them, and you'll be probably pleasantly surprised with everything that they share with you. And I think you'll probably be more successful as a result.
That's probably a common pitfall too, is making yourself available for feedback, right?
Yes.
Sometimes you're so nervous, the
Yes.
stakes are high, you're not even thinking. Sometimes there's a spotlight in your face and you can't see anybody. But I like the encouragement for interactivity and bringing people in, because
Yes.
you get the real thing in real time,
Yes, of
which is
course.
sometimes hard to get. A lot of your courses feature this component of, related to what we're talking about, persuasion, how to become a more persuasive communicator or business writer. Tell me a little bit about that as it relates to like outcomes, for instance.
Mhm. Yes, of course. I think that, again, it goes back to what we just discussed. One of the, I think, big problems that lead to mistakes in persuasion is when we think that whatever works for us, what persuades us, is going to be equally successful when we try to persuade others. And that's not the case, because we're all different. We're very different people. Some of us are more emotional, some of us are more logical. And so, if you're strictly a logical thinker and you feel, if I give people some very rational explanation for what I want, and I give them all kinds of data and research and studies, and it's just going to be all well organized and logical, of course they're going to agree. And then, of course, you have this unpleasant surprise when people react sometimes emotionally to what you're saying. I'll give you one example. I was working with a large hospitality lodging company. I won't name the names,
Okay.
but in our workshop, a story came up when they were sharing with me about a new revenue management system that they were trying to implement, and they brought it to all of their property managers, hotel managers, and general managers.
This is a sales tool for hospitality professionals
Right.
in restaurants and hotels.
Right.
Revenue management.
And
Yep.
revenue management
Yes.
system. And they were so excited about it,
Yeah.
thinking, goodness, it's going to be so great. There's so many benefits. And when they shared their thoughts with the property owners and managers, there was a very surprising pushback. And they were taken aback by this because they did not expect it. And when I worked with them, I asked them specifically, you came in with everything that you thought was great about this innovation, but have you thought about all the possible reasons why the people that you're talking to might have concerns or might be uncomfortable with this idea? And the answer was, well, why would they? Because it's so great. And then again, you were thinking about it from your own perspective. But the approach you need to use is to switch this perspective completely, as much as you can, to your audience, and start thinking about all of the things that will hold you and will not help you move away with that communication, and address that for sure.
Yeah. So we've just seen a first glimpse of an emergent theme that's going to be, we're going to keep repeating this, right?
Yes.
Know your audience. I guess you can't say it enough. Let's think about those of us that need to speak publicly that maybe aren't very good at it, right? We have
Hmm.
nervousness, anxiety. It could be the
Hmm.
worst thing in the world. You work with people quite often
Yes.
in this capacity. How do we need to start thinking about this? How do we begin to overcome what seems insurmountable?
All right. So everybody's nervous.
Yeah, you and
I
I
think,
are.
I think, yes, I think it's just a matter of how much
Yep.
of that nervousness you have. And if this is something that, instead of just giving you energy to communicate, becomes very challenging. And of course, you want to work through that. So exposure therapy is a great thing.
Yeah, it worked for me.
Well, but seriously, I'm
Yeah.
joking. But seriously, I think that the more you practice, the more, not even practice, but the more you have opportunities to interact, to give presentations, to be in the spotlight, the more comfortable you're going to get with that. And another important thing to remember is that practice, of course, matters a lot. And you need to almost over prepare for when you have to present, when you have to speak publicly. But over preparation means not memorizing what you're saying, not writing the script, because then you literally give yourself only one possible way to present and share this information. And that's very limiting. And anything that's very limiting and gives no options becomes triggering for anxiety. Because if this is the only possible way you can present, of course you're going to be nervous about forgetting something, about saying something not exactly the way that you wrote it. And that just makes everything much worse. So instead, know your message, over prepare by practicing your message in multiple different scenarios, in multiple different versions, so that you get to the comfort level of sharing that message through all of those variations. And you want to also be prepared for all kinds of disasters that potentially can happen. I often tell people that you may have your rehearsals go great, and then when you're on the stage or when you have to give that presentation, you might be surprised that it's not exactly as your rehearsals. And that's normal. That's absolutely normal because it's impossible to repeat your rehearsal exactly the same way. We're not computers, we're not machines, we're humans. Of course, we're not going to just copy paste when it comes to our presentations. But if you're prepared for example, someone is not paying attention in the audience and you see clearly that they're speaking to another person. If you're prepared for that, you're not going to be nervous. If you're prepared for the case when all of a sudden your time gets cut short, if you have that plan B for that situation, then you'll be prepared. You won't be nervous about that. If you're prepared for the scenario when something happens to your slides and they don't display, and you're fully prepared for that, then of course you're not going to be as nervous. I can tell you about that from
Yeah,
my
tell me about
experience.
this
Yeah.
nightmare scenario. We just talked about this before we got started
Yes,
today.
we did.
There's a critical takeaway from this. Tell this story about we've all had disastrous
Hmm.
presentations, slide deck machines not working.
Yeah.
What happened in your case?
Yeah. Well, in my case, and I often share this story with my students, but I had this amazing presentation prepared about my research, and it was a professional conference that I attended. There were three speakers in my particular segment, time segment, and I was scheduled to go last. So the first two speakers who spoke before me, everything worked great for them. And unfortunately, they also took their time. And then there is not much time left for my presentation. And when it was time for my slides to go up, they didn't. And the whole system shut down. We had an IT person on the side who tried to help me restart the whole system, and it was taking forever and it was still not working. And I was looking at the time thinking, I'm running out of time. I won't be able to even share my research. And then I told that IT person, I said, never mind, I'm just going to discuss it. And that's what I did. I just spoke to people about what I prepared. I explained it. I had a conversation with them, and it went great. In fact, I had a book chapter as a result of that presentation because an editor of the book came up to me after the speech and invited me to contribute. So, as long as you're prepared and you know very well that it's not going to be ideal, something is not going to go well, and that's okay, then you're prepared. And for all of you who, and I keep saying it all the time, for all of you who give presentations with your slides, if you cannot deliver your presentation without the slides, then you're not prepared. You still need to keep working.
You know, Yeah, I mean, that's the big takeaway. I can't think of a single presentation that has gone as expected. But I think what's even more interesting, and this is a takeaway that I kind of just observed just a moment ago, which is, you know what's really compelling? When somebody's slides don't work and they're able to deliver a presentation, right?
Oh,
That's show
absolutely.
business right there. You've just
Absolutely.
done it.
Hmm.
So kudos for having accomplished that. I have a good question from Peter here who asked,
Yes.
knowing your topic, your subject matter is key. You know,
Yes.
that goes into the preparation component. How can you best respond to unexpected questions? So if we're in an interactive situation,
Yeah.
is it okay to say, I'll pass on that one, or to, I don't know, how do you think about unexpected
Oh,
questions, interactivity
yeah, I
in a
think
large
it
forum?
really it depends on the question, of
Sure.
course.
Yep.
But what I would encourage people is to think about your presentation as a start of a conversation.
Hmm.
When you give your presentation, when you talk to people, you share some information with them. You're trying to teach them about something. And then, of course, if people are interested, they start asking questions. So it's a very, very positive sign. The really bad sign after the presentation, when there are no questions,
Yes. Right.
then you didn't do your job. But when people ask questions and you did not expect them, first of all, it's completely fine to say, oh, interesting. I did not expect this question. And then, depending on what it is, ask yourself, maybe this is something that's worth discussing. And you can throw the question back into the audience and say, what do you all think? Because I didn't expect it. Any thoughts about it? And people can start sharing their ideas. And that actually could be a good way for you to buy time for yourself to collect your thoughts a
Yep.
little bit
Yep.
and then add your own take on that. And sometimes, yes, you can say, you know what? I have to admit that I'm not prepared for this question. I love it.
Yes.
It's very interesting to look at the topic from this perspective. Is there any way we can have this kind of conversation later, or
Yeah.
you and I can get together and chat? So it really depends on the situation, on who you're speaking to, and what kind of question it is. But again, treat it as a conversation. So invite people to contribute, pitch in, have a joke, ask them your own questions. So whatever it is, but that could be probably even more engaging for the people.
What about if you're just completely bombing, right? I mean, this is the toughest question out there,
Yep.
right? You've lost everybody, you can see it. What about visual cues? Being able to tune in, that must be part of this, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's very important to pay attention to your audience reaction.
It's hard to do when you're
It's
presenting.
very hard. It's very hard. So my biggest advice is make sure you don't rush through your presentation. Take your time. Take your time, include pauses, include some questions for the audience in the middle of your presentation. It could be just some very simple check-in question, asking people, are we following along? Everybody's still comfortable? Everybody's okay? So things like that. And when you start noticing that people are losing interest, they start checking their phones, they start talking to each other, it means that, you need a new game plan, that whatever you came in with that was prepared is not working anymore.
Yep.
And you have to be flexible enough to adjust. It's probably going to be a good time, as I said earlier, to ask them a question.
Hmm.
Ask if they fully understand what you're saying, if there is anything perhaps that at this point you could explain better to them. So inviting them into your talk when they lost attention is probably one of the best strategies to bring that attention back.
Okay, so you have visual feedback, you get a sense that you're losing the
Yep.
room, but there are other ways to go about this, which is to measure the effectiveness of your presentation. How about feedback? How do you teach that? How do you think about how
Mhm.
to elicit feedback that's meaningful so that you become a better presenter?
Right. Well, feedback is absolutely important. In my classes, I always have, of course, I provide feedback, but then
Yeah.
in the courses that I teach in person with students, they are the courses where we strongly encourage feedback from multiple different people. So we have assistants who provide feedback, and students themselves provide feedback to each other because it's equally valuable. So I would absolutely always encourage everybody to ask for feedback from the audience. Keep in mind, though, that people tend to be gentle and they try not to hurt your feelings. So they're more likely to tell you what you want to hear, unless you strongly encourage them to be candid and give you constructive feedback. You can even tell them, look, you're not going to hurt my feelings. My goal is to improve. Please tell me where you see the areas where I can improve. And then when you receive that feedback, another important step is show gratitude for that feedback, because if you visibly get upset with their feedback, it's not validating what people are trying to do to help you. So be grateful for that feedback. Maybe ask if you could work with that person, if they can give you even more.
Yeah,
So
it's an
whatever
opportunity.
it takes, but you really need to take it seriously and show that you're taking it seriously. It's something that uh, public speaking and communication is something it's always going to be work in progress. I don't think that anyone can ever say, that's it, that's the end, I'm done, I'm perfect, I'm great. So it's growth. It's always going to be growth.
You have a course entitled Impactful Unscripted Communication.
Mhm.
Sounds cool. Why is this skill so critical? What are you teaching this?
Yes. Well, it's very important skill because this is what we do daily.
Yeah.
We communicate and it's not scripted and it's thinking on your feet. We do it daily, whether it's in our personal communication, professional communication. And when we give an important presentation, when we have a high stakes situation, that's when, of course, we're going to invest time and prepare and plan and be thoughtful and strategic. But unfortunately, when it comes to our daily conversations and communications, we don't necessarily treat it as important. And I think it's a big mistake because you build your professional image, you build your relationship with people through all of those smaller encounters, and staying as focused on your audience, as thoughtful about your purpose in communication, as tuned in into your audience needs and values, what's in it for them daily with every single bit of communication is going to make you overall a more successful communicator. So it's not just when you're on the stage, that's when you shine. You really want to try to shine in your everyday communication.
I'm so glad you said it out loud because a lot of us don't think intentionally as
Yes.
much as we would otherwise about unscripted. So good advice. We should tell ourselves this all the time. I have a great question from viewer Beth,
Yes.
who checks in and says, Maria, as an educator, how are you addressing the phenomena of telephobia among Gen Z and younger? I've encountered this in business, even at prestigious financial firms. It's not only unnerving, senior management has no idea how to address it. We hate to paint a broad brush when it comes
Mhm.
to, generations and behaviors associated with certain generations. But some of it is true. You work with, young undergrads. Any experience in this telephobia space?
Mhm. Could you elaborate on the
Telephobia,
telephobia
afraid to communicate.
to communicate?
You
Okay.
know,
So I learned
again,
something new today.
I kind of did too. I didn't know what it was called, but
Right.
a hesitation to communicate with people across channel, cold calling, maybe,
Right.
for
Right. Right.
instance, right?
Right.
In this case,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. This probably goes to some of the lessons that we previously covered today, but I thought it would be interesting to bring up.
Yes, it's very interesting. So I see how it could be frustrating. I see how it could become a challenge in the workplace. And I think that the very first point that I would like to make is that I would not necessarily call this generation as being afraid to communicate.
No,
They do communicate, they just communicate differently.
right.
And I think that the solution would have to be two ways. We would have to support this generation, to support, for example, my students in their communication efforts and help them grow into a more comfortable level with various channels of communication, such as calls, being on a video call with someone, interviews, just talking to people. But at the same time, I think that it's equally important for those of us who are comfortable with all those channels of communication to respect and to learn about the way they communicate because it is meaningful to them. It is. And sometimes, I'll tell you one thing that sometimes I do in my classes. I literally schedule time for students to talk to each other. When I tell them, oh, here's the topic, or here's something that I want you to check in with each other about the work that you're doing. And I schedule this time for them to just talk and communicate. And over time, I see the difference because they become more comfortable doing it at their own initiative and doing it freely. And I think that's an important thing to celebrate when you notice that it happens, to join that conversation, to pick up that conversation, to ask them questions. They appreciate when we try to learn about them. And I think that if we do it actively, it will definitely contribute to better communication. But the big mistake would be to just fight it, and to feel resistant to it because it just creates a gap and very big misunderstanding.
Yeah, and perhaps to scapegoat any generation for a particular behavior may not be the wisest thing. We've had 4 or 5 generations in the workforce.
Of course,
right now,
of course.
so.
And each generation is different.
Let's be real, yeah.
Yeah, and so this is just they're different.
That's
which is, again, it's completely normal. We may not find it comfortable for us, right? But then we also have to work on that as well. So we cannot just put everything on this generation and tell them, hey, brush up your skills.
Yeah.
It has to be both direction and respectful.
Yeah, always. Something that I find really cool in your teaching, you talk about consistency across communication channels, right? Meetings, written, emails, phone, whatever it might be. Consistency is key, but you emphasize this idea of finding your unique voice or cultivating it. We might have hinted it earlier in this conversation, but I want to hear more.
Yes. It's something that I would say I encourage, of course, everybody to think about what's unique voice. And it's definitely something that's worth investing time into developing. The very first step that I would recommend to everybody is to learn yourself, understand yourself a little bit better. So, for example, if it's about public speaking, presentations, have it recorded, watch it, cry a little bit because you're not going to like it.
It's horrible.
But it's a great learning tool because you'll be able to notice a lot of different things about yourself. There might be some mannerisms that you don't like. There might be some things that you would actually say, you know what? That actually was much better than it felt during the moment. So start noticing those trends and patterns and then work through them and identify the ones that you feel are unique and the ones that help your personal style in communication, because those are the ones that are worth investing time in. And at the same time, I would also recommend that while it's really, really good and helpful to pay attention to other successful communicators and speakers and seeing what they do and trying to imitate them, at the same time, I strongly discourage everyone to just be like them because you don't want to be the kind of cookie cutter type of presenter.
Yeah.
You want to be you. So you want to have your style. And whether it's a signature gesture that you will use or a signature little element in your talking. For example, you would include little anecdotes, a little bit of humor, or you communicate by inviting a lot of questions. So whatever that is, that just needs to be just yours and people will recognize it.
Every time we talk about presenting communication, what comes up every time is, how do I nail this in a virtual environment? And people really want to know, like tactically, how do I do this? How do I make myself a better communicator within Zoom?
Yeah.
For instance, do you have any tips on on how to do that?
Oh my goodness, I have a whole class on that.
You do?
Yes. So
Okay.
my virtual
Or virtual communication.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
So one of my eCornell courses is specifically on virtual communication,
Okay.
and it was built when the pandemic started,
Oh, goodness.
because when we all went into lockdown,
Yeah.
it was mid-semester, and all of
Yes,
the
it was.
students, yes, and so we had
This is
to.
about 5 years ago.
Yes.
Yep.
Feels like yesterday.
I know.
But that's when we all realized, and us communicators, particularly, we all realized that, look, it's an important skill. It had been around for a while, but at that time, we did not have this as a set of skills that was taught formally. And I was looking at all kinds of online resources, and they were all over the place.
Yeah.
And some tips were good, and some tips were completely, you know, not helpful at all. And so I pitched this course to eCornell, and I said, look, we need to have something like that people can access and get some help with virtual communication. So that's how that course was built. Within several months, really, it was a very, very quick process. But one of the most important things about virtual communication is, of course, to understand that it's very different from face to face. And it would be a mistake to approach your communication over Zoom without any changes, that you just sit and you just talk the way that you would talk to person when you just physically right next to them. You cannot read body language signals, and your audience cannot read your signals as well. So you need to have more attention on that part, on that's visible to your audience, such as your facial expressions and maybe some gestures that are visible within the frame. So you need to be very thoughtful about those gestures and what you show with your eyes, with your face. You need to be more thoughtful about your intonation. So you actually have to amplify your vocal variations, because if you stay in this fairly flat, monotone intonation, it's very easy for people to lose their attention. And then, of course, in general, people feel like they have probably more permission to lose attention when they're not physically in the same room with you, when there is this distance, right? There's a computer screen. So for that, I would recommend, again, whether it's a presentation or you have a meeting that's on Zoom, to strategically find moments, I would say ideally every 5 to 8 minutes, when you will have something planned for your audience to do, to answer a question, to respond to a poll, to look something up on their phones and respond to you or share with everybody. So have them do something, because once you have people actively participate, it's less likely that they're going to lose their attention. So that would be probably my first go-to set of.
Yeah. Again, things that need to be said out loud over and over, right?
Absolutely.
How does what we've been talking about thus far translate to the written word? You teach writing as much as you do speaking and presentation.
Yes.
Persuasive writing,
Right.
for business, etc. I don't know, where do we start there? Short of taking a Maria Wolfe course.
Well, how much time do we have?
Not much.
Well, business writing is a completely course on its own.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I teach it to freshman students, and it's an interesting course because students come straight from high school or from other experiences where they write mostly academically, or some of them do creative writing. And business writing is something that is very, very different. And for many of them, they share that by the end of the semester, the whole concept of communication and writing has been turned upside down. So things like, you don't want to share all of the background and walk people through all kinds of explanations before you arrive at your main point. You flip it.
Yes.
You start with the main point and then you provide explanations. The idea that different approaches to writing will work for different audiences, and you have to be conscious about it. Such as, for example, if you put in some information together that you think is important, but for your readers, it's going to be old history and it's just mindless background information, then don't put it there because it's not helping them. So you only want to keep what truly is meaningful, keep it brief, make it easier to read. In fact, people in business technically don't even read, they scan.
Yep.
They scan. And so you want to be very thoughtful and strategic and place in all of your main points as early as possible, because chances are that people are not going to read until the end. And with that, I can give you all one practical tip about business writing.
What is it?
Think about how nowadays people receive communication, through what module or through what particular device, and it's probably going to be the phone.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So we all receive everything on our phone. So if your communication, if your email or whatever you're sending to people is something that's long enough that takes some scrolling involved, then it's probably not working. You need to really shorten it up. So ideally, it needs to appear on the screen and people don't have to scroll. So everything that is important for them to know has to be right there. And it should probably take them about just a few seconds to understand. If it takes them longer, you're losing them and they're not reading what you write.
You know, one theme that also has emerged, or just something that I'm thinking about when we do these, is we're not making great communicators after 39 minutes here, right? What we're doing is encouraging people to
Right.
to know how to become great communicators and the path forward. And several of those paths, in this case, would be your business writing or business communication certificate. We've pointed to your persuasive communication. So it takes a whole suite of skills.
Oh,
And I
yes.
think that's really something that I've learned here, and that those skills can be also applied across different media, different channels, different ways of communicating. So I appreciate that. Thank you for guiding us through
Of course.
some of the keys to get us thinking about how we can all improve. Some of the lessons learned: preparation, practice. There's a million valuable things, but I think preparation and practice and flexibility is obviously maybe another one that I've learned from you here.
Yes.
Prepare for the worst.
Of course, prepare for the worst. It might not be the worst at the end of the day, but it's definitely going to be different from what you were hoping for.
Yeah.
Most likely something is going to go wrong. Something is going to go not as you hoped for, because the ideal scenario just doesn't exist. We know that. So, and I think that if we boil it down to the main principles, I would say, as you mentioned, Chris, across all the channels, across all of the genres in communication, is focusing on your audience, telling them what they want to hear, give them what they want, make sure that it's upfront and the focus of your communication. Remembering the purpose, what they're trying to get as a result, not what you want to share, but what you want to get as a result. So what you want them to do, making it very, very explicit and beneficial, ideally. And of course, adjusting to the context, because context changes, people react differently, and having this willingness and openness to not just stick to the plan that you had initially is very, very important, because that's really at the core of flexibility. So audience, purpose, context.
Thank you for listening to Cornell Keynotes. Check out the episode notes for details on eCornell's Business Communication Certificate Program, which is authored by our guest, Maria Wolfe. And it is also created in partnership with the Johnson School at Cornell University. I want to thank you for listening, friends, and please subscribe to stay in touch.